Welcome to another episode of Historical Markers. Today we're in the Yamacraw area of Savannah at the Georgia State Railroad Museum, and there are a lot of good markers here, so stay tuned and we'll let you know what all these markers say. And hopefully you'll like these, subscribe, and let's see what these markers have to tell us. This is the Roundhouse foreman's office. The foreman gave assignments to the engineers, mechanics, and shop crews from this office. This office was built in 1926 to 1927 when the southern half of the Roundhouse was rebuilt to a larger size. The foreman's office occupied the first floor. The second floor contained the engineers' lockers and lavatory, which provided shower and changing facilities. This 1945 photograph shows the Roundhouse foreman's office. It features a new system using 700 wooden blocks placed in a grid to track job assignments and locomotive schedules. Each badge master, brakeman, conductor, engineer, fireman, and flagman had a block with his name on it. Every freight, passenger, or extra train had its own numbered block. Other blocks were marked with times for trains to depart and crews to report to work. The foreman, night crew dispatcher, and day crew dispatcher arranged the blocks to schedule locomotives and workers along the main line and in the rail yard. And then the Roundhouse foreman's office today is the gift shop. The Roundhouse. The Roundhouse served as a garage for locomotives where they could be serviced or repaired. Incoming locomotives traveled on rails to the building to arrive at the turntable in the center. Operators aligned the rotating table with one of the individual roundhouse bays where the locomotive was then parked. Locomotives parked in the eastern portion of the roundhouse underwent minor repairs. Major repairs occurred on the western side where the drop table is located. Why isn't the roundhouse round? The Central Georgia built this as a circular building in 1852 to 1855. The green circle on the plan drawing of the roundhouse to the right identifies this original construction. The roundhouse had to be enlarged as steam locomotives became larger. During 1926 and 1927, the Central of Georgia expanded half of the building to accommodate larger engines, which is the red line. Eventually, the roundhouse became obsolete when the large steam locomotives were replaced by diesel locomotives. In the 1960s, the remaining 1850s half of the roundhouse dashed green line was salvaged for bricks. This is the turntable. How do you park a locomotive in a roundhouse? Use a turntable. A holster drove a locomotive onto the turntable. An operator rotated the turntable from a control box at one end of it until the table aligned with the desired track running into the roundhouse. The hostler then drove the locomotive into the proper bay for maintenance. This turntable was made in 1907 and was relocated to Savannah from the Central of Georgia Railroad shops in Columbus, Georgia in 1923. It was extended 5 feet on each end in 1945. This is the same turntable length and configuration that exists today. Although it is powered by an electric motor today, the original table was not motorized. Welcome to the Central of Georgia Railway repair shops at Savannah. You are entering the heart of the Central of Georgia Railway complex in Savannah. This miniature city produced much of what was needed for the construction and repair of locomotives and train cars. It handled administrative, passenger, and freight activities. Most of these buildings were constructed in the 1850s or 1920s. The Central of Georgia was a major employer and a driving economic force in the state and region. The move from steam to diesel locomotives shifted work to the Central of Georgia Railway's Macon complex. The Savannah facilities closed in 1963. Today, the complex is owned by the City of Savannah. Coastal Heritage Society began restoration and rehabilitation activities in 1989. This massive effort continues along with increasing visitor opportunities. In 1996, the Georgia State Legislature designated it Georgia State Railroad Museum. The colored shopmen's locker and lavatory. The railroad provided separate washroom facilities for whites and African Americans. Facilities and opportunities were quite different for black and white people historically in the segregated South. Jim Crow laws required separate but equal public facilities, and the Central of Georgia Railroad was no exception. Typically, African Americans held labor and trade jobs with limited opportunities for advancement. African American railroad employees formed their own social and professional organizations. This washroom served African Americans, while a washroom for white workers was located near the workers' garden. Washrooms at the site provided showers, lockers, and changing facilities. White and colored signs defined these spaces the same way the signs on the right marked drinking fountains at the rail shops. Drop table. A drop table is located in the roundhouse. It is a device that enabled mechanics to remove the axles and wheels of the locomotive easily. This allowed repairs to the wheel assembly and to otherwise inaccessible parts of the locomotive. The drop table consists of a platform and a short section of track. When mechanics lowered the drop table beneath the locomotive, the wheel assembly sitting on the drop table's tracks was lowered into the pit. The drop table then moved the wheel assembly horizontally in the pit to an adjacent track. Mechanics raised the drop table to ground level in an adjacent bay where they serviced and replaced the wheel assembly. The storehouse was constructed in 1925 to hold a wide variety of supplies used by the railroad. Storehouse stock included tools and parts necessary to work on the train cars, but also the many items needed to run Central of Georgia's miniature city. Orderly arrangement of thousands of items in bins and shelves was critical. In 1926, years before computers, this was a job for the storekeeper, 4 clerks, and a stenographer. The nuts, bolts, and other items needed to build or repair passenger cars were arranged by the American Railway Association classification system. The storehouse also contained a multigraph department for printing forms, letterhead, and other paperwork necessary for the railroad's operation. This is the marker plane, the Central of Georgia Railroad Shops and Terminal on the National Historic Landmark List. This was the Blacksmith Shop. It had 13 forges. The railroad complex needed blacksmiths to forge iron, locomotive, and rolling stock parts, hinges, and other hardware for buildings, and also tools and equipment. Some of the forged parts were sent to the machine shop for threading and other milling. The western end of the blacksmith shop may have served as a foundry for non-iron metals. Bronze bearings and babbitt bearings were common items that foundry workers made. Each forge had an underground flue to exhaust coal smoke. These flues were connected to a central flue, which led to the exterior smokestack. Here's inside the blacksmith building. The blacksmith's tools included in the display are the most essential blacksmithing tools and equipment. They included forges, a water tub for cooling hot metal, anvils, a vise, a cutting arm for trimming metal rods to length, swage blocks for working with hot metal, a drill press, a power hammer, and blacksmiths had to make their tools and master their use. These tools of the trade included tongs, rakes, and ladles. Pieces of metal too large to be shaped by hand tools were forged using the power hammer. The power hammer used steam to hoist the weight of the hammer and gravity to drop it down onto the work. Like all machine tools, a power hammer needs a foundation independent of the building. This hammer's foundation extends about 5 feet underground, steadying it as 1,500 pounds of cast iron hits the anvil. The power hammer could handle the largest parts on a locomotive, including the drive rods. Although this is not the original power hammer, the hammer here today is very similar to the one used by the Central of Georgia and rests on the very same footing as its predecessor. So this right here would be the power hammer. The smokestack. It served dual purposes. Underground flues connect the stack to the boiler room and the blacksmith shop. The system operated on the Bernoulli principle. The height of the stack enabled wind and pressure to create a vacuum and draw smoke through the tunnels and out of the buildings. The hot air created by the boiler expanded and rose, contributing to this effect. This also brought fresh air into the boiler, creating a hotter fire. The stack contained a large water reservoir behind the iron panels that held water needed by the shops. The base of the stack housed 16 privies, or toilets, and changing rooms for workers. So here's the smokestack. And it just kind of keeps going and going. And if we walk around the smokestack, notice there are several little doors here. Here's one that's actually open. Let's take a look inside. This would have been a restroom hole. And this probably would have been a changing room. This was the machine shop. The courtyard in front of you is actually the remains of the machine shop. Notice walls and the foundation that supported the various machines. Can you find the ghost outline on the wall inside the doorway, marking where the stairs once were? The Central of Georgia Railroad built this shop between 1851 and 1855. The Sanka floor was added in 1876. Machinists working here milled metal by threading pipes and bolts, drilling holes, and planing items to various sizes. The machinists also finished iron objects made in the blacksmith shop and repaired items such as train wheels. The train wheel lathe, drill press, smaller lathes, and metal planers were powered by the line shaft from the boiler room. The curved wall by the front of the machine shop marks the outer wall of the original 1850s roundhouse. So here's if you look over here to the right, there by that window, you can see the faint outline of the stairs going up to the second floor. This is a pretty good sized room. Planing shed and lumber shed. Workers in the planing shed milled lumber for rail cars and other wooden items manufactured by the railroad. The grouping of planing shed A and lumber shed B next to the boiler room C was intentional. A line shaft from the boiler room extended to the planing shed where it powered a Daniels planer. This planer had a reciprocating carriage and rapidly created a smooth surface on rough wood. Wood for planing was readily available in the adjacent shed, and wood shavings from the planer helped feed the boiler fire that produced steam for the line shaft. The railroad converted the lumber shed into an area for electrical equipment in 1907 when electricity was supplied by a utility company. This area included a dynamo which replaced the steam engine as a power source. Dynamos were generators that produced direct current. They commonly powered industrial sites during this period. By 1931, a compressor was added here. Tender frame shop and master mechanic's office. This 1855 structure served various purposes. Originally, workers built frames for steam engine tenders, and the master mechanic had his office in this building. The tenders built here were wooden horizontal undercarriages that supported the locomotive water tanks and fuel. An archway connected the tender frame shop to the machine shop. This allowed workers to move the constructed frames for machine work. Increasing locomotive size and technological improvements such as replacing wooden tender frames with iron to reduce fire hazards made the tender frame shop obsolete. In 1899, the Central added a second story. Later, the building housed scientific testing and air brake testing laboratories. The master mechanic's office occupied the first floor, as did an apprentice school. The Workers' Garden. Picture this Central of Georgia complex at its peak. Imagine the haze from coal-burning locomotives, the din of hammers in the blacksmith shop, the shrieking of metal milling, and the whining of planers and saws. Why is a garden in the middle of this industrial complex? The railroad encouraged gardens, which gave workers a respite from their industrial surroundings. There was a friendly competition between rail yards, each claiming prize vegetables or flowers. The Workers' Garden you stand in now has been recreated in 2004 with the assistance of the Trustees Garden Club. It is based on the garden designed around 1900. Tradition credits rose enthusiast and master mechanic Whitehurst with creating the garden. Mr. Whitehurst had an additional interest in developing this garden as his office window overlooked it. Below, Central of Georgia workers stand in the garden in 1923. And then here's the garden as it looks today. With the little fountain outside it. And there's a little plaque down here that says, "The Fountain. This was giving in loving memory of Catherine Eaton Prince Cobb." The Carpenter Shop. The Carpenter Shop changed size, shape, and even names throughout its history. Employees in this building completed any woodworking required for railroad cars and all railroad operations. This included construction of furniture, building components, and any wooden elements along the entire central line. The building you see now is only part of the car shop building that first housed the woodworking shop. Originally completed in 1853, the shop formed a U-shape. In 1923, fire resulted in the railroad salvaging part of the structure and rebuilding to the current shape. A second fire struck in 1987, leaving the building in its current state. By 1925, cars were made mostly of metal, and the painting and repairing took place in the newly constructed coach and paint shops. Employees in the Carpenter Shop continued other woodworking operations here until the shop closed in 1963. And today, this is actually part of the Children's Museum. Here's another sign talking about the Carpenter Shop. The one we just read is directly in front of me. This one looks like it says basically the exact same thing. A little more information on this about the number of cars built by year and the amount of money made by the passenger car men. And then here's another view of that building as it is today. Paint and coach shops and transfer table. The coach and paint shops were built in 1925 on the same spot where two buildings were destroyed by a fire 2 years prior. The fire was caused by a smoldering spark from an acetylene torch that was used to remove paint from rail cars. The railroad built new fireproof structures using modern techniques. This included fire sprinklers, steel beams, and reinforced concrete. The paint shop featured a sawtooth skylight that flooded the work area in uniform northern light. The coach shop has a double pitch skylight. Employees in the new facilities built, repaired, and painted rail cars. They did cabinetry, upholstery, electrical, and sheet metal work. Employees also performed testing of paints, lubricants, oil, water, adhesives, and other materials used by the railroad. And here's the paint shops. Let's go take a look inside. Well, here's what it looks like inside today. I see some archways over there. But apparently they're doing some work inside this one. This talks about the Mainline Viaduct. You can see the top of the brick bridge or Mainline Viaduct directly in front of you across Louisville Road. The railroad completed construction of the viaduct in 1852, connecting the shops complex to the mainline trains, leaving the Roundhouse on this track would run west toward Macon, Georgia. Each bridge arch spans 30 feet. And then if we scroll up, there is the Mainline Viaduct directly in front of us. Well, that was all the markers at the Georgia State Railroad Museum. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe to see future videos, and we'll see you in the next episode of Historical Markers.